Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Pop Astrologist Presents. I have today a very special guest with me, my dear friend, again, talented. I'm just like only friends with talented astrologers, y'all. Like female talented, that's my vibe, okay? But so happy to introduce my friend Laura Chung.
Hello. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Laura, for joining us. I guess we can maybe like start very light. Want to tell everyone what your big three is? Because I mean, this is
Sure.
probably the lightest part of the conversation we get into today with
What do you
our
mean? We always have a good time.
for those who don't know, Laura and I actually recently collaborated on a special It Ends With a series. I say series because I am,
Has not ended.
it has not ended. So two parts are out on YouTube. Go check it out on her channel. But yes, Laura, introduce yourself, your big three, and something maybe folks might want to know about you.
Sure. So my big three, I'm an Aries sun, I'm a Aquarius moon and Sagittarius rising, and I have a little stellium of Libra.
Mm.
And something that's important to know about me is I think that I'm an astrologer who is like based and rooted in reality, but also I don't personally believe that the heavens are here to make our lives harder. I do believe they're loving, and I believe that there's so much potential, but it's our own human inclination to make our lives harder sometimes by not leaning into the challenges of life. And so I'm always like, just, lean in and see what life has to offer.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, honestly, Laura and I are internet friends who I think were sisters in a past life. At least that's my personal take. But Laura and I had very similar past lives as finance people who decided to take that leap of sag faith into the unknown and,
Mhm.
kind of really engage with life a little more intentionally.
Yes.
When I was storyboarding, I guess, this episode and future episodes, there was undoubtedly only one person I wanted to do this episode with. We are covering Luigi Mangione today. Dun dun dun. Not starting small here on the Pop Astrologist. But I love Laura's focus on collective liberation, using the astrology as a tool to really help uplift voices, but also I think inspire hope and claim our sovereignty, right? Like reclaim the divinity within us, helping us actually rise up and understand, okay, maybe we have more power than we think we do. And, Luigi is obviously a very interesting case study around it. There's a lot of astrological significance around this moment. We are recording this on the day Venus is formally stationing retrograde in Aries. It's a big day, it's a big season, it's a big Aries upcoming season. And with the trial, I thought, why not get into it, right? This is up for discourse. So, I guess before we continue, you know how I like to roll biases, okay? So astrologers can have interpretations, and also just to note, this is not to say Luigi is guilty or not. This is just to talk about the symbolism mirrored in his chart at this time, because the cosmos speaks to us in a myriad of ways. But I would love, if you had any biases that you want to, be made aware of just to inform the viewers watching or listening.
My biases.
Your biases. Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
yeah. So my sun is at 0 degrees of Aries, which is conjunct his Venus in Aries. So I'm very attracted to him. I'll just put it out there.
I mean, we'll get into that obviously because his chart does lend to the debate of pretty privilege and like the fans, even though of course he is promoting a very important cause, but I love that bias off the bat.
Well, it's a bias because I've been so skeptical of white men for so long, like cis
Mhm.
hetero privileged white men. And then Luigi comes along, and I'm like, exactly, King. Like, this is exactly what you should be doing, allegedly,
Alleged,
right?
right, right, allegedly.
Allegedly. And I think my other bias is I don't believe he did it. I was telling Tasha my huge conspiracy theory because when you look at the photos that the NYPD released and then Luigi's photo, I was like, that those three people are not the same people. The guy that shot the guy that shot Brian Thompson
Mm-hmm.
was wearing like a black jacket, which had no pockets. The
Mm-hmm.
second guy they showed was a man in a green jacket with pockets at the hostel.
Mm-hmm.
And then Luigi had like a unibrow when he was detained in Pennsylvania. And so I was just like, these three people are not the same. And I felt like the astrology at the time was like reflecting that because of all the mutable
Mm.
fusion. There was a Mercury retrograde. So my
Yeah.
bias right out the gate is I
Yeah.
don't believe he did it. I
Yeah.
think he is a part of a bigger story.
Amazing. Karen, if you're watching, Karen the lawyer, we consent to being used in court because this is clearly
Yeah,
how society is going these days. If you
literally.
anything you say literally can or will be held against you in court. But anywho,
Wait,
yes,
do you think he did it? I want to know.
do I think he did it? I honestly, I mean, I think it's a compelling narrative, and I think for me, I don't actually care if he did or not.
If he
Honestly.
did, I would support that
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. I feel like so
Yeah.
I was on a cosmic conversation with Celeste, another astrologer, and we were talking about the concept of does the end justify the means, right? And I
Mhm.
think that what I really love about this conversation is because we are again walking into Venus retrograde, right? Where it's so much about recalibrating values, like, oh my God, we've evolved into different people. And in Aries, like if you think about our values against around violence, around
Mhm.
how we reclaim again agency,
Mhm.
and conflict, right? Rallies around conflict. And so I think this is a really interesting time because a lot of people I don't think have ever necessarily considered the idea of, oh my God, like killing is justified, and so now we're in this very nebulous territory of, okay, well, is killing justified when there's so many killings on the other side? And, admittedly, for in your terminology, the global majority, right? Like we've seen institutional powers being used to kill en masse,
I
right?
know.
So
Yeah,
it's
I was
like,
gonna say, like, what is your definition of violence? Because
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
allowing millions of people to die with because they don't have health insurance to me is the most violent act.
mm-hmm,
And so it's like,
absolutely.
how are you framing violence in the context of a violent institution system?
Mm-hmm,
Like popping one guy versus millions, I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I think a lot of people will say violence is never the answer, right? But then, like,
yes.
the carceral system is violent. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, Luigi being in prison also brings up all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one man I think is really as a vessel
Mhm.
unearthing so many different layers of how this system is kept together, right? And so now you kind of see it unraveling for the public and the fact that we have a federal trial coming up during eclipse season. So just to break down the episode for folks, we're going to get into Luigi's chart first. We're going to talk about, some really important things that we are seeing. We have no time, even though if you have the time and you want to give it to us, always happy to receive. And really, then walk through the timeline because astrologically, we are in a very significant moment for the United States. It is amidst its
Mhm.
Pluto return. And, I will be pulling up the transit chart for the day of the assassination because this is a very significant moment in US history, whether we maybe realize it or not, feel it or not, this just is. But what I wanted to say was, I remember finding out about Luigi when I was on a plane to Singapore. I had no one to talk about this with. This was literally in a 10-hour, like, from Istanbul to Singapore. And I'm like, there's so much happening here because there's
Mhm.
the astrology that's happening. But what I found interesting about that time was I had to explain this to my nephew, my 9-year-old nephew, right? Who was like, oh, is it bad that he killed someone? It's bad. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, yeah, like this is the moment where all of us are trying to have these value conversations about what is actually important. This is a big framework shift. And we just had a new moon in Pisces where it's all about, I think, deconstructing what limiting beliefs and what is possible and to imagine something bigger than what we already have. But we will have, hold on, where's the recent charts? Luigi. Dear Luigi Mangione, okay, opening, I'm like a lawyer, opening statements, please, based on what you see from the chart. But again, no time confirmed. So he is at a 12 o'clock birth chart right now.
Mhm.
Yes.
Or do you want me to make like a first
I
impression?
mean, you're a guest. I always love to have my guest, take the juiciest part of the meat. So please have at the
Oh,
meat of the bones. Not to objectify him, please. I can't help it. The Mars and the sun.
I know. Well, I guess I'll start with his sun since that's what we
Mm,
know for sure. Like 15 degrees, Taurus, sun, 15 degrees in the fixed signs are the world points because they signify the midpoint between the solstice and the equinox. That's also, I think, when not we, but like Beltane, it's a celebration of spring and things that are blooming. 15 degrees at a fixed earth sign is basically the most fixed you can be. It is literally in the middle of spring. And Tasha and I were talking about the Sabian symbol that goes with this. So I don't know. Do you want me to read that?
Oh yeah, yeah, go for it. I think that was a very important actually
Yeah.
addition.
So with Sabian symbols, you always want to go the degree up. So I'm going to read for Taurus 16, which is an old teacher fails to interest his pupils in traditional knowledge. And these are by Dane Rudyard, who like channeled each degree of the zodiac and came up with, I guess, a channeled message for each of them. And you could
Hmm.
figure out the each of degrees of your sun, moon, and rising and other planets. And it's just very on point, always. So this one says the inadequacy of past knowledge in time of crisis.
Mm.
During this Act 1 of the cyclic process, the emergence of new developments is emphasized. In time of crisis, as for example, the storm being braved by the man of the last symbol, the type of wisdom learned from this past remains in the background to be revived later on in new forms. What is emphasized is change.
Mm.
Traditional concepts are not adequate to confirm the new conditions of existence. Thus, whenever this symbol comes to a seeker's attention, it indicates that even the most consecrated tradition does not have the real answer to the problem. So, I found this to be interesting given that there is a fixed star at 14 degrees, which is
Hmm.
Menakar. And this is from the website Dark Star Astrology. Menakar, so the fixed stars are usually a little dark in nature. When you read about them, you're like, what? It's like like you might die in a drowning and you're like, okay. But this one I thought was interesting because she or he or she or they wrote specifically to be a pawn in the winds of change,
Hmm.
to be a victim oneself. So I think the fact that his son is at a world point, it's conjunct Menakar, this fixed star that talks about being a pawn in the winds of change. And then the Sabian symbol talking about that, like past knowledge is not going to be, it's not even going to be relevant to the times right now, is I feel like Luigi
Hmm.
being used as a symbol at this moment of our history.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is so powerful. I mean, because here's the thing, those details I think add so much color, of course, and nuance. But I think even if you just look from, Mars on his sun, right? A motivating force. Mars is an agent of motivation, inspiration, activation, leadership, right? On some level. And so with Mars on the sun, it can be simultaneously self-empowering, or you can be motivating other people. And then when I think about it in the context of Taurus, it's a Venus ruled sign naturally, right? So Mars in Taurus, it's like, how do we feel about this? But realistically, change takes a long time to unfold. Like Mars and Taurus, Mars wants the immediacy, but then Taurus is like fixed, right? And so stagnant. And so I
Yeah.
do think you do see that mirroring of like, oh my God, there's all this resistance, but there's a desire for something new to break through. Which is also very interesting because obviously that configuration opposes his Chiron in Scorpio. Which if you even think about Scorpio from the archetype, or not archetype, but Scorpio can symbolize insurance.
Mhm.
So first off, but one thing I found really interesting was part of the narrative that I think is getting shopped around, okay, by forces that be, is, maybe his sore spot with intimacy, or like the idea that his back injury at the time um restricted his ability to also like get intimate with women, and at least that's part of the narrative, right? And so when I see a Chiron in Scorpio, I'm like, okay, there feels like another hit to that. And again, just because there are things activating in the chart or are being interpreted in the chart, again, does not necessitate that Luigi is the person that did it. But there's a lot more around the storytelling of this pretty significant event in US history.
Mhm.
I'll state that at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that his sun and Mars are answering to that Venus in Aries, which, he's going through his Venus return,
Mm.
and Venus is in
Ugh.
detriment in Aries, and so is his Mars and his Venus have mutual reception, so it makes it that much more like um impactful in his chart when he has
Mhm.
mutual reception between two planets, his anima and his animus, just like speaking to each other. So
Mhm.
the part that you said about the sexual frustration that came from, I consider Taurus to be like a sign about embodiment, the
Mhm.
body and sensuality. And Mars Sun conjunct people are very sexual.
That honestly in Taurus, it's literally so sexual sensual. Like it.
Very. It's like I want to touch you, I want to feel you. And so, he's a young man, so I'm sure that when his back went out and he wasn't able to exercise anymore and have sex, like
Mhm.
very frustrating, sexual
Mhm.
frustration.
Yeah, very deep with
Mhm.
this one. But when I think about someone that has Mars and Sun and Taurus, like I just everything is like a fashion statement. Everything is really like very Venusian. I mean, yes, he's attractive. Yes, like there's more to him than meets the eye, but we can't deny the Mars and Sun Taurus of it all. Like there is magnetism, there is sexual magnetism there, and it is a part of his platform. It is a part of his service. It is a part of him as the vessel, as this agent of change. So I'm here for it. Like more pretty people, please use your privilege for good. Like,
Yes.
let's be real.
And also being a cis hetero white man,
Mm-hmm.
and he went to an Ivy League college. He came from
Mm-hmm.
like a middle upper class family. I think that is why the system, or, the NYPD and, oh, I hate saying his name, Mayor Eric Adams, they they treated him as this, like, they wanted to make an example out of him because
Mm-hmm.
there's something about young people, with like the student encampments who have Ivy League degrees that is so threatening to the system, because students and young people don't have liabilities to the revolution, like people with
Mm-hmm.
kids, people with mortgages, they're the ones with all the energy. And so I think, again, him being attractive, him being a white man, him being well educated, God was going to choose someone like him. God was going to choose someone beautiful. I'm just saying.
I mean, if you have a picture of your ankles going viral, like I'm so sorry. And here's the funny thing. I personally don't think I would have found Luigi particularly like
No,
if he were
absolutely
walking
not.
down the street. But
No.
now you have him, you have this form, you
It's
have the
lore.
exactly, you have the cause attached.
Yeah,
It's very linked to get. It's like to me, it's impossible to disentangle. Like it's
for
you
sure.
need the support on all sides. And even if it's like maybe a shallow rendition of this or a deeper rendition, all sides have to buy in, right? Healthcare will be the uniting force, I
Literally,
believe.
you said that.
I
It will
believe
be. It will
across party lines.
for sure. And I think that's why people from Republican, Democrats, all walks of life can relate to somebody having back problems and
Mhm,
being a victim of this very abusive and violent healthcare system.
mhm. Yeah.
Each and every one of us has had an experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love you bringing up the privilege baked into Luigi as like sort of this prime candidate to be made an example of, right? Because Taurus, so much about that is also social status and elite society. And if you think about the family he came from, this long-standing, upstanding Italian family in Pennsylvania, like respected, I think about the leader of like that type of community, his family representing that. And then the idea that Mars invites severance and a separation. And so when you think about Sun in Taurus, maybe even like father symbolism, like the projected ideal of what we expect, but then Mars is here to sever that narrative, especially with all that Aries in the chart. Especially because he's also coming into his Saturn return and he is starting to gain momentum around his voice. He has entered his progressed lunar return at 27, this massive period of unlearning that, is tying into this deep, massive deprogramming we're seeing on a world stage. But I was going to say, obviously, his Aries stellium is really worth noting here because we are walking into an Aries season like no other. There's the astrology of 2025, and then there's literally the astrology of March
March.
2025. And Luigi obviously has his federal case coming up right in the middle of March, March 14th. But is there anything you would like to maybe comment on around the Aries? I mean, as another Aries experiencing all this energy, like what could this potentially be feeling like, but also, thinking about grander implications?
Yeah, you wrote in the notes that because I remembered the solar eclipse April 8th, 2024, because we went on a road trip together, right? That was 90
Yes.
degrees of Aries. And
Yes.
um the sun in Aries is exalted at 19 degrees. So that was a very profound solar eclipse. So I'll save the Mercury part for you, but Eris, he has Eris, the goddess of
Hmm.
discord, at 19 degrees of Aries as well. So he has an Eris Mercury conjunction.
Hmm.
And Eris is the goddess that threw the apple at the goddesses and essentially caused the Trojan War because she wanted to have like a she wanted to expose the real rivalry between the goddesses. So her throwing the apple was an act of wanting to expose something that was being hidden by these goddesses. Again, goddesses are like very Venusian. They're all very beautiful. They're all very in their ego, but there was something deeply insecure about each of them that they got into this like the girlies were fighting essentially, which then like if you know the mythology that started the Trojan War. So again, whether or not Luigi did it, um him just being the symbol of this like because this isn't just about the assassination, this is
Hmm.
about exposing something very deeply corrupt with this insurance healthcare system.
Yep.
And the fact that Brian Thompson too was going to an investor meeting to tell them that he had like made them, I don't even remember the amount that he made them from this AI system that they installed that declined 80% of claims.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you deny 80% of the claims, that means that there were people on the other end of that who suffered. They
Hmm.
either got sicker or they died. Like, how
Yeah.
sick is that?
No,
So
insane.
it's like there's so many layers of symbolism too, like whose lives are valued, who are we fighting for, what
Hmm.
are we fighting for anymore? And I think like when I saw that he had Eris at that degree and I essentially the solar eclipse kind of activated so many different things in his chart that yeah, that's what
Hmm.
I noticed.
Yeah, no, and I think it's also important to know, obviously, because an eclipse, like, just because the eclipse happened on this date, it doesn't mean like everything has to happen on that date. It
Mhm.
can take up to 6 months after for events to transpire. And so, we have been in an eclipse cycle that was in Aries and Libra, right? The South Node, the collective South Node karma was in Libra, and the North Node in Aries. And so since July
Mhm.
2023, which is admittedly a very significant time for Luigi, right? Because that was around the time I think he had like maybe suffered his back injury, or was that maybe a
Mhm.
year after? But this was around the start of Pluto moving into Aquarius
Mhm.
also. And for Luigi, right, like that's really significant because he's got that Neptune at that early degree in Aquarius. And so if I think about, a spiritual revolution, or like this idea of a martyr rising, right? Neptune. And if you think about a spiritual martyr on behalf of the people, Aquarius, a revolutionary on behalf of the people, and Neptune can also be a very uniting cause. It can be very dissolving, but it can also be uniting. So in this sense, there was the martyr rising to dissolve the illusion held by a wide group of people, but also being the revolutionary that hopefully can inspire people. So it's like very multifaceted, very Jupiter in Gemini,
Yes.
all in one.
Mhm.
One thing obviously of note also with the Aries stellium is, as you noted, his Mercury. I always find in planets that are like caught, in between planets, like besieged, very interesting because, then to me, it just doesn't feel like that Mercury is free, right, to communicate the way it wants to, even though, there is a lot of agency that he's taken on for himself this time around. But it kind of reflects the struggle that he might have felt earlier on, not being able to maybe express how he's felt about like class warfare, or like the fact that, we have so much more stuff than we need. I know there are hypothetical journal entries. Okay, HBO Max apparently has a documentary which I find very distasteful. Like, it's so weird to have something like media produce content on a trial where evidence hasn't been
I
introduced.
know.
Like, what is happening
I
here?
know.
It further adds to your, I'm just gonna say, like, your conspiracy theory argument, right? Not that I don't believe it, but just for those who are listening. It just adds to this whole narrative. Like, what are you really trying to do here, from the government? But Mercury caught in between Venus and Saturn. Saturn feels like authority, the law, and
Mhm.
then Venus so much about like, Venus in Aries is not necessarily the most empowered. She doesn't really have all her resources, but she is trying to learn the art of conflict as a sign of love, right? And so, how can I get my point across while as an act of love, but then also being trapped by what everyone's going to say, the challenges that come from other
Mhm.
people, and also the law and authority. So, the idea that now with Mercury and Aries, it was always there, and there was a spark that needed to be lit. There was just a moment that really, it needed to get pushed over the edge, and then it was never coming back, I think, at that point.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I well, his Saturn is in its fall,
Mm-hmm.
and he has Venus in its detriment.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like his Venus, Mercury, Saturn is giving like outlaw energy. And then Taurus rules the throat. And so,
Mm-hmm.
also with that fixed star, Menakar, what I didn't mention is they talk about that it also rules the throat and being very outspoken, but we
Mm.
haven't heard him speak yet. So, right?
Everyone's speaking on behalf of him.
Right. And so I'm wondering if he also feels very frustrated by that because I think he has a lot to say,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
he had a lot to say, but maybe he couldn't find his voice or the ways in which he can express himself. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to hear him speak because up until now, we haven't even heard anything from him.
No, no. I mean, we've heard, other things like the
Mhm.
bullet encasings, right? We've heard
Right.
again, like the journal entries, quote unquote, right? Alleged, if they are his or not. We've heard his good read reviews. We've heard his voice in passive form via the past, but we haven't actively heard him in this current embodied form, which I think is interesting. I mean, they obviously had a website up for Luigi. I'll include that website in the show notes, okay, just to
Mhm.
give you more access. But he does release a statement, that he is incredibly humbled by folks by sending all these pictures. I think there is now a limit on the number of pictures you can send him. I believe five is the limit because he has to get through everything. So just FYI, Laura, that
Sorry.
Venus sun felt motivated. You got to only limit yourself to 5, okay? But yeah, I think that is very interesting. It still mirrors this idea that I've made a statement, but I'm still silent and I'm not
Mhm.
necessarily being heard the way I want to be heard. That feels very trapped Mercury
Very trapped.
all these forces. Obviously, can't help but talk about the Virgo moon as well. If you think
Mhm.
about the healthcare of it all, I mean, the only thing that came to mind, admittedly, when news of the assassination broke, when all the media outlets were like, this guy was so efficient, he was so calm, cool, collected. He just, the first time it didn't go off, boom. And then the second time, it just like, it didn't phase him. And I'm like, this mofo has to have a Virgo moon or like has to have a Virgo something where it's like cool, calm. And I'm just, if it's, if it feels like empowered, if it feels confident in what it's doing, it's clinical, it's surgical, it's like, and then when I see the Virgo moon, I'm like, yeah, this kind of describes the vibe right now. Your protein
But
bar.
but I think a Virgo would never get caught.
I don't know. Blake Lively thought that too.
That's true. But I'm not gonna okay, I'm gonna defend Luigi if he did do it. I feel like he's way smarter than her.
Ye- yes. Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, I feel like
Yeah.
he's because of that Taurus. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very patient. Obviously, he has a sun Mars, so that could be, go either way. But if this is his chart and well, this is his chart, but if he actually did it, then I feel like he's somebody that planned this very well. Why would he get caught in a McDonald's? Second of all,
Mm-hmm.
it just
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of the things that they were showing didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was gonna ask, I feel like the whole McDonald's of it all is also really fascinating. I know I've heard lore about the person who called in or phoned Luigi in,
Mhm.
not even getting the bounty or the pay. Like there's
Right,
so
right, right.
many right things about it. Yeah, I must say, when he got caught, and you know what, let me actually maybe bring up that timeline because it feels relevant to talk about right now. Around December 4th, around that time. You know, Neptune at the time was like stationing direct. Mars was about to go retrograde. There was just a lot of activity around that Christmas time, and we were just coming out of a Mercury retrograde. So I feel like on some level, yes, the plan can be very, very like amazing, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like the McDonald's plan was amazing. Like, because to do something like this, you can't just, I think, in theory, murder someone in broad daylight and then escape forever. Like, I think you want to think about the impact you're trying to make with that. And that would mean you have to go to court. And that would mean it has to be a spectacle in the way that the American audience ingests these things and
Mhm.
to really again make this lasting impact in the zeitgeist because again we're still talking about this guy, right? Like, oh my God, we caught him and he's a trial. We are not talking about the Trump assassination person,
Mhm.
like if that was real or not, right? Like
Mhm.
that just disappeared into thin air, but we are still talking about Luigi very significantly. So I think, the McDonald's, I mean, as someone who used to love McDonald's, I found that to be a very interesting touch. I know BDS lives on, but like, yeah, I thought it was very Taurus to get
Mm,
caught at McDonald's.
that's
So like,
true.
I was like, okay, I can see that. He got hungry. Okay, a hash brown would hit after killing
I'm
someone.
like,
Like,
he's an Italian man. I don't know. I was like, the McDonald's had to be specific for a reason. My whole
yeah.
thing was if this was planned, because he had a YouTube channel, and his
Mm-hmm.
last video said, if you are watching this, then that means I got caught. So let's say that he planned this, that he would get caught, that he
Yeah,
would go to
yeah.
court. Then why not just stay in New York? I don't know. The whole thing, it was like, why not just stay in New York? Why go to Pennsylvania?
Okay, okay. You know what? You've brought this up now. I'm gonna bring up something before coming back to this part, but okay. This is why. Thank you for entertaining my like Sag Moon, like let me wander off and see connections vibe. But this is why I was like, wait a minute. I feel like I've heard this story before also, like in American history about a past assassination that happened in New York and then like moseyed over to Penn. Like literally this whole vibe felt like this was John Wilkes Booth all over again.
So
And so
he's John Wilkes Booth in this
yes.
timeline.
Like, hello. Initially, I thought, oh my God, I'm so fucking crazy for thinking this. But then I pull up the chart and look at this,
Yeah,
right?
that's wild.
They've got literally exact Venus and Aries. They've got the
Yeah.
Taurus sun, okay, very similar degrees. They've got the Jupiter. John Wilkes Booth Jupiter is on Luigi's nodes. Like,
Yeah,
like, you know, there's, and the South
that's
node on the Lilith.
pretty
Like,
on point.
it feels very loud. And here's the thing, John Wilkes Booth used to also be a high-performing achiever in school from a well-to-do family and
Mhm.
was part of this new radicalized revolutionary youth who wasn't like, I would say it wasn't trying to be party system, very similar to Luigi, because as much as Luigi is our healthcare, advocacy king, he is also, I think, representative of a new wave of intellectual thought around dismantling two-party systems and what's
Mhm.
actually important, what is effective, right? And I think regardless of where you stand, whatever party allegiance you have right now, John Wilkes Booth at the time, right? Again, anti-Lincoln, but kind of embodied a lot of these ideals as well. And so to me, it just felt very striking that the two major instances of assassinations, I mean, there are others too, but the fact that geographically there was resonance here, symbolically in the chart, there's activation. I mean, down to the Mars and Taurus also for
Down to being born in Maryland.
down to being born in Maryland, down to being caught in Pennsylvania, like down to like literally
Okay,
there.
I could see it.
You know what I mean? Like it's kind of wild. I'm like, thank you for entertaining me. I need to get this theory out there. This is my conspiracy theory. John Wilkes Booth is Luigi Mangione reincarnated. Okay.
Okay, I see it. I
Welcome
see
to the channel. Welcome to the channel. But I was gonna say, was there
it.
anything else about Luigi's chart? I mean, obviously he's going through also like, his nodal opposition right now, but is
Mhm.
there anything else that, you feel is important to highlight, to note?
I just think that his Pluto is conjunct the fixed star called Antares. And for fixed
Mhm.
stars, I use like a 2-degree orb. So it's pretty on there. And I couldn't find any literature around Pluto conjunct Antares, but I have my ascendant conjunct Antares, so I've done a lot of research on the fixed star.
Mhm.
Again, it's not love and light, sunshine and rainbows at all, but it is a Persian royal star, and so if we consider the 0 degrees of cardinal signs to be world points, the 15 degrees to be the world point for fixed signs, then I consider like the 4 fixed stars to be, pretty significant when people have planets around them. And Pluto just being the symbol of transformation and death and rebirth and exposing of corruption, but also if the Pluto in Sag is a generational planet. So I'm not saying that, every Pluto and Sag person, if you have 7 degrees, is this way, but I'm just saying that the Pluto conjunct Antares could be somebody who takes matters into their own hands by being a criminal themselves. And also that Pluto is at the bends of his nodes, his
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
right.
The square, yeah, Pluto is squaring the
Yes,
nodes.
yes, yes. I was
Lovely.
like, oh my God, wait, I did see that exactly
Yeah.
where his nodes. So
Yes.
when you have a planet at the bends of your nodes, it's like that planet is very significant. I mean, this is like I'm basing this on Hellenistic astrology, which doesn't necessarily speak about the outer planets, but I consider
Mhm.
this to be significant. So his Pluto conjunct Antares, bending of the nodes, it's like he that Plutonian energy is coming out.
Yeah, and it is significant, the Pluto activation, because as I said earlier, the US is going through its Pluto return. Um, Actually, you know what? Maybe
Mhm.
that's a good segment to bring up. Because let's see, the Sibley chart, US Mangione. I use the Sibley chart. I know there's like other charts as well. There's the Moncasi chart that is pretty interesting to consider. But what I wanted to do was bring up the assassination, the day of the assassination, and then in the context of the Sibley chart as well, because, you know, as you just mentioned, Luigi's got Pluto squaring the nodes. Usually in evolutionary astrology, if there is a planet squaring the nodes, there was some form of self undoing as part of it, like understanding a skip step and the role you played in that. But when you think about Pluto in Sag, right, you think about maybe a force bigger than yourself, even an
Mhm.
unspeakable tragedy, just a larger than life entity, because Pluto does belong to the collective as well,
Yeah.
not just personal, as you said. But I find it interesting that his almost like Plutonian destiny is getting activated as the US again is going through its Pluto return. The US just went through its Pluto return, but we are very much still in its narrative. But how striking is this chart for the day of the
Mhm.
assassination in the context
Oh
of US,
yeah.
right?
Like
Like
Mars stationed on the north node of the Sibley chart.
literally, literally. And if you actually even, I looked up the Sabian symbol for Leo at that 7 degree for the United States. A communist activist spreading his revolutionary ideals
Oh
is
my
the
gosh.
symbolism. The
That's
emotion, isn't it amazing? The emotional and ideological attempt to return to a state of non-differentiation and chaos as a prelude to a new type of order.
hmm And wasn't that an applying opposition? Because like the opposition happened January 3rd, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the second one of it happened.
The
So
second one.
November 3rd, or I think no, November 6th, around the election was the first
Mhm.
Mars and Pluto
Right.
opposition. That was in Cancer and Capricorn. So that was the last of Pluto and Capricorn. So that would have been, again, super significant for the US
Mhm.
in the context of the election happening. Now, this was gearing up for the second Mars Pluto opposition. And then realistically, again, as you said, Mars was stationing on December 6th. So in a couple of days, Mars was going to start to appear to go backwards, right? And
Yeah.
this happening on the US's karma line means
Mhm.
that we are in for a massive rehaul. Again, the
Mhm.
communist ideals feels very, very interesting. Also, I think Karl Marx, right, was a very big Taurus. Like I think he had
He
Taurus in
was
his.
also in the second decan of Taurus.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So again, these communist ideals is sort of because I think Luigi had also talked a lot about austerity, and when he was like backpacking and stuff in Asia, you know,
Mhm.
it was like, wow, people can survive with like a lot less. Like, why do we need all these things, right? Like, it's also very Taurus like resources. How
Mhm.
much do I really need? How much do we
Yes.
have? Um, but I find it very interesting also this Jupiter Mars activation that day. Like Jupiter and Mars to me feels very trigger happy.
Mhm.
And you know, at the time Jupiter and Saturn were starting to like tighten up their square,
Mhm.
the second
Mhm.
square first
Yes.
hit back in August. But when this happened, when this activated the chart, what was kind of like your first almost like reaction? Because I know you also keep track of
Mhm.
the US chart and mundane
Mhm.
events, right? But like from that implication, like what was your first hit?
I think what I noticed right away it was that Mars was going to station on the USA's north and south node, and
Mhm.
we are in the Pluto return of the American Revolution.
Mhm.
So even though we technically went through the Pluto return when Pluto was in Capricorn at 27, but we are technically in the Pluto return of the American Revolution, which then gives this revolutionary vibe. And so I was like, I wonder what's going to be our triggering moment, which we've had many already.
Mhm.
We've had many so far. So I was thinking, like, what is this going to be about? Like, what is ours going to be about? Right. Because the American Revolution, like, however, 240 some odd years ago, was
Mhm.
taxation without representation, which is why we have that.
Same, still.
Same, same.
Same, same. Still same. Still same. Okay.
Um, which in this case, you use Placidus is the North Node in the eighth house. If you use whole sign, there's a
Mm-hmm.
Cancer stellium in the eighth house. Either way, there's this focus on the USA Sibley chart around taxes.
Mm-hmm.
So this
And
time, it being in healthcare, at least like part of the story, right,
mm-hmm.
was also very not shocking to me, actually. I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, oh, it has to be something that people are suffering from in order to get their attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, felt very right on time. I
Mhm.
remember writing my newsletter at the time, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like I don't necessarily know what is going to explicitly happen, but I do know that this is going to be a moment that is going to galvanize, especially because, November was such a hot month too. Over these last couple of years, right? Essentially, Pluto moving into Aquarius, like
Mhm.
Pluto was dancing, trying to get into Aquarius permanently. But I would argue like his story really starts in 2023,
Mhm.
but for everyone as well, your Pluto and Aquarius story has been starting over the last couple of years. It's not like you're just walking into a brand new paradigm like off the bat and you're like, I have no idea what's coming for me. It's you've
Right.
had these couple of years to really plant those seeds and to really like see what you're working with. And really this is what this March is going to be about. This is the culmination. Okay, is there a change that you want? Can you be the agent of change you want to see in the
Mhm.
world, right? And so it is again very striking that Luigi is going to have his federal case
Yes.
amidst all this Aries, the culmination of this. And admittedly, I don't know if you've heard anything recently, but last I heard, we still don't know if he's going to be um I guess if federal prosecutors are bringing the death penalty against
Mhm.
him. I
Mhm.
don't know if that's confirmed yet or not, but
I
that's
don't know. Yeah.
insane to me. Insane.
Yes.
The court case is like in 2 weeks.
I know. Well, what I've been thinking about just from what we've discussed so far, and also Luigi's soul contract with Pluto squaring his nodes, I'm like, is there some, is the highest timeline him being in the death penalty, being
Mm-hmm.
martyr to the cause? And
Mm-hmm.
then you had this outrage of people, right? Is that the moment?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's what I've been thinking about, especially because there's going to be a lunar eclipse in Virgo on March 14th, which is his trial date, right? And it's going
Yes.
to conjunct his moon,
Yes.
which
Yes.
the moon represents your body. And when we look at electional astrology, you always look at what the moon is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just like,
Yes. And it's also a day that Mercury is stationing retrograde. I mean, we're recording this the day Mercury
true.
enters a shadow
True.
period, but again, his Mercury in Aries, like this
Mhm.
is a very significant moment for him. I mean, you didn't
Mhm.
need astrology to tell you that, but
Yes.
yeah, the consequences of that day feel very, very ripe. And here's the thing, he's got another state case in June, and that will be like after Jupiter moves into Cancer, which feels like a very different era in of itself. But what I just noticed too, the US Sibley has Venus in Cancer at 3 degrees, right? Luigi
Mhm.
has his Venus in
At
Cancer
th- so
at three
Venus and
degrees.
Aries at three
Venus
degrees.
and Aries, yes, yes, yes. The
Yes.
natural square. It's like
Yes.
what I think is right versus like how things have always been.
Mhm.
Feels interesting.
Mhm.
Um, and also, what I did want to say was, this Pluto in Aquarius era has really brought out the lawsuit website receipts, between Justin Baldoni,
Mhm.
and between now Luigi having his own site to offer
Right.
transparency and a platform. I think that was launched. I think the day around the new moon in Aquarius, like around maybe that Jan 30th time frame, which was also around the time that Trump talked about the death penalty being reinstated in like federal prosecution. And that was around that 9-degree Aquarius new moon activating the US's South node, right? So to me, I'm
Mhm.
not, here's the thing. I don't think in any world there's going to be a fair trial. Like there can't be a fair trial. And so to me, this is a trial that should be thrown out. But I know that the defense is a whole lot of he doesn't deserve this because of the way that there's a lot of mishandling around it as well. But if I think about the bigger impact, I would think if I were an institution, I would want to make an example out of someone, no matter
Yeah.
it, no. And so It just feels really momentous for something, and we don't seem to be in that. Like, part of the Pluto return is, in order to actually move ahead, you have to integrate and be one with the darkness that you've been trying to bypass, right, in this country from day dot. And so, is there really a toppling moment that we've seen? Can there be a true toppling moment that galvanizes people to really say, hey, we don't want to put up with bullshit anymore? So, yeah, it just seems really interesting to me with the timing of this and the US Sibley chart.
Yeah, well, when you read about history and how revolutions begin, it's because the people, ooh, see,
Oh,
the people don't eat, they can't eat, basically, right?
yeah.
So that's how the French Revolution started. That's how a lot of revolutions start. And I'm just looking at that moon in Aquarius in the third house and how
Mhm.
we, the people, because in a nation's chart, the moon represents the people and it's in the sign of Aquarius. And that line is from like the Declaration of Independence, you know?
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, like, does it have to get to that point where people literally cannot afford to eat anymore? Which, you know, there's a bird
Mhm.
flu, their eggs are expensive when people actually start to like revolt
Mhm.
in a meaningful
Mhm.
way. And going back to your lawsuits on websites thing and how everybody's invested in Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, everyone's invested in Luigi's case. I think it's that moon in the third house. It's
Mhm.
everyone's like a lawyer now. Everyone's like a internet sleuther because it's like people don't trust the system anymore.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's Saturn ruling over, that Aquarius moon. Like, yeah, that makes sense. We all have an opinion about something. But what is also worth noting is that Saturn in Libra for the US is going to also get stress tested this Aries season with,
Mhm.
the Venus station, with the eclipse. It does feel, and when I think about Saturn in Libra, I think about social order and I think about
Mhm.
class stratification and the idea that Aries is going to challenge the
Mhm.
status quo of what we have come to appreciate about our class in America. God
Yeah.
forbid.
Well, I was telling my parents, which they think I'm like a complete outlaw now, that like if this administration, which is just a like they're just being loud about what this country actually believes about people of the global majority and marginalized communities, right? Like they are
Mhm.
just being loud about what every administration before it has just been about, which is white supremacy, the patriarchy, and capitalism and colonialism, right? Like we can
Mhm.
all agree on that. And so it's like, to a certain extent, I believe Trump is the highest timeline. I believe
Mhm.
him just saying whatever the fuck comes out of his mouth, excuse me for my French,
Love
uh,
it. The SAG loves it.
it's almost just you can't deny what's going on anymore. You can't like the Democrats are about the same thing. They just slap on a BLM sticker or like a
Mhm.
rainbow flag, but it's like you can't deny what it really is about anymore.
Mhm.
It is what it
Mm.
is. And the more people awaken and people who were protected otherwise by their identity cannot be protected anymore, like white people losing their federal jobs, like were once like the most stable jobs in our country, right, are losing
Mhm.
them. And so it's like the more radicalized, because Trump and the plutocracy is Pluto in Aquarius.
Mhm.
Like they are representing that archetype. The more that they are doing that, it's like we, the people, the moon, we have to resist in every way
Mhm.
we can.
Mhm.
I don't know. It
Yeah.
just feels on time for me.
Oh, totally, totally. Like, not to say that we're in the business of fear mongering or like this is what's coming or whatever, right? But I think we're coming at it from an observational place. Like, we understand change has to come, and we
Mhm.
understand that if things are working the way we understand them to be working, this is how the process works. The death rattle, I think, as you've described previously. And it's not pleasant to navigate it, of course, but hope comes from the fact that we have to believe we're in the highest timeline, as you said. So
Right.
definitely wanted to echo that,
Yeah.
double down on
And
that.
just one more note that
All the notes.
the USA Sibley chart has Neptune in Virgo, and it's at the highest point of the USA's chart. Whether you use Placidus or whole sign, it's at the top. And so
Mm-hmm.
the Neptune and the transit Neptune in Pisces opposing the natal Neptune, it's like deteriorating the American dream. Like, what is that about? And, we're going to go through eclipses. Oh, yeah. And Luigi's moon is conjunct the USA's Neptune. And now we're going through the
Insane.
eclipses of Virgo and Pisces. I'm just wondering how much of that is going to the fogginess and the Lululemon of that Neptune and Virgo is, I feel like people are realizing really quick that it's a scam.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of like Neptune in the chart showing you where the illusion is held. And if you think about in the Sibley chart, Neptune and Virgo, the illusion is in healthcare. We are a free country, but what is freedom really if you can't treat your people?
Exactly.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you layer Luigi's chart on the Sibley chart, and it's just, oh my God, right? Like he is the revolutionary. And granted, yes, I think the Aquarian archetype of criminal and genius and revolutionary, it's a very fine line. Okay,
Mhm.
how society views you as the other is going to dictate whether you are a criminal or a revolutionary. And maybe you're the same, right? But
Mhm.
nevertheless, it is an instigating, galvanizing force. But one thing that I also that just came to mind was noticing that Luigi's South Node is on the US's Ceres in Pisces. And I know Ceres, is so much like about our nurturing and our mothering.
Mhm.
And we think about the idea of the American dream, part of this conversation that we're talking about. This, the US and the American dream. It's the greatest marketing machine in the world. And you think about that being so Piscean because it's all that glitters, but is it really gold? And you have Luigi's South Node in Pisces, right? Representing privilege, representing all the illusions of what you think you should want coming into this country as an immigrant and that whole experience. But because it's the South Node, we're moving away from it and we're actually really getting practical Virgo and humble with our service and where we want to actually target that service. It's moving into that empowerment of his Mercury in between his Venus and Saturn. But Mercury can also rule the handgun or the automatic rifle or whatever, right?
Mhm.
Also very significant in the context of the US and going through its Chiron return and all the Aries on the Chiron. So again, there's like all the multitude of layers, right? Because if I think about kids in the Pluto Sag generation growing up, you grew up with Columbine. You literally
Mhm.
grew up with Columbine. Okay. You grew up
Yeah.
with school shootings as a normal part of your existence. And the idea that, again, going back to who's the real villain here, a kid brought up in a system, Ceres in Pisces, where there was thoughts and prayers offered to gun victims, to kids getting murdered in schools. And now, you're coming of age, Saturn return, you're maturing, you're making your stand in the world. In my head, of course, you would resort to a weapon because
Mhm.
this is all that's
So
indoctrinated and
true.
fed. Like,
I mean, even in Uvalde, the cops were all outside not doing anything.
literally.
Remember that? That was so
Yeah.
horrible.
Insane, like actually insane. So, yeah, I think, Luigi is bringing up really complicated. I mean, even at the time, right, of the assassination, we had the Daniel Penny fuckery of it all,
God,
right?
yes.
Like that to me felt so Jupiter in Gemini at the time.
Mhm.
The idea that there are multitudes to the
Mhm.
stories, but there are most likely going to be instances in the collective showing you two very similar situations, but on different sides of the coin. And
Mhm.
how you're responding to that is going to be very telling of where you really stand. So to see a
And
white
weren't they the same age?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It was all very similar to see a white man in that
Mhm.
capacity murder an innocent. black homeless man on the train, a mentally health,
Mhm.
challenged homeless black man on the train in broad daylight and being hailed
Mhm.
a hero.
I
But
know.
this guy's getting a perp walk, taking
Mhm.
out a CEO, allegedly taking out a CEO who
Mhm.
has actually like played a big part in the murder of a lot of people,
Mhm.
right? So again, our values, Venus retrograde. Where
Mhm.
are our values? Are we living in accordance with them? What
Mhm.
is your value here?
Mhm. I 100% agree.
Yes, I know. I am. I feel like there's obviously going to be more to talk about with Luigi, down the line at his trial, but I just wanted to, was there any other kind of thought? I would say not even a prediction, okay, because we are in very weird times right now, but any additional thoughts, anything you feel like it's really important for people to keep in mind as they are tuning into the trial?
I definitely think that again, he is a symbol of change, that something needs to change. And whether he did it or not, I think it's like, I don't care if he did it or not, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you. If he did
Mm-hmm.
it, amazing. Take one for the team.
Yeah.
But I do think that, this sort of vigilante justice we might see more of just
Mm-hmm.
because of the energies that are coming up in 2025. I'm just thinking because we're going from like nocturnal
Mm-hmm.
signs to more like diurnal signs,
Mm-hmm.
the more feminine to the more masculine, the more yin to the more yang. So we're going into fire and air. And so all of that stewing and like processing, and maybe some people weren't processing, is going
Mm-hmm.
to now be like, okay, how are people going to take action? And I would just, again, just, I guess with the Venus retrograde in Aries, and it's going to go into Pisces, which I think is going to be a nice reprieve. It is like, who is couched as a terrorist, who is couched
Mm-hmm.
as the villain in this story when you look at the context of how the US was founded. It was founded on genocide,
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Mm-hmm.
like, do you even have a right to tell anybody that they're bad you know
I mean, we're recording this like the day after the Zelensky Trump thing,
I know.
like conversation.
Come on.
So again, we are in very not unprecedented because these are very similar rhyming times, but nevertheless, like we are gonna be bearing witness to some pretty fucked up conversations and things on a global stage. So yeah,
Yes.
it would make sense people would want to resort to their power in
Hmm.
being the vigilante to take
because
control.
because if this administration doesn't even consider people of the global majority and marginalized communities as human, like we're
Mm-hmm.
not included in the Make America Great Again, because what they're really saying is just like white supremacy,
Mm-hmm.
then why do we have to follow their rules?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are we beholden to something when we don't even have the protection of the law?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can die for your country, but you might not be able to get healthcare after.
Right. Exactly.
Talk about an unequal energetic exchange, okay?
It's not equal energetic exchange. And Luigi's so his sun sign is the second deacon of Taurus, which is the
Mm.
Six of Pentacles. And in that tarot card, it's all about reciprocity,
Mm-hmm.
which is so funny that you said that, because it's like you can't receive if you don't give in kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, the last thing I was gonna say was trust the Virgo in the group project to like be like, I'll do it. Like Heidi
Literally.
Montag style. Like I am Earth materializing this. Like I have come to really
Yes.
appreciate Earth as much as, I hate the Earth demonstrated by
Mhm.
Blake in that situation, which again, go check out those videos because those again, deep dives on more than you ever need to know about. It ends with us. But it just shows you where like Earth can really bury someone with it or can really help support and nourish like an
Yes.
environment, and Earth are the doers of the zodiac.
Mhm.
And if you don't have any Earth, it might feel hard to like take action on things. And so when you see folks with Earth take action, it can be really inspiring because they are
So
literally
inspiring.
creating a new world
Yes.
for you to exist in.
Mhm. And
Hmm.
the Virgos would be doing it because nobody else can do it as good as them. They'd
Yeah.
be like, what the heck? You're just not as good as me. So I'm just gonna volunteer as tribute and do this myself, you know?
Let me be the martyr of Saint Luigi.
Yeah.
Like, again, it's all in his chart. It's
Yes.
He's the religious icon. We're headed to Jupiter in Cancer, so religion is in the air. And Mars in
Literally.
Cancer, Saint Luigi.
No, and like how the perp walk, when they showed him in the perp walk, people were saying he was
Jesus.
like Jesus, when
Jesus
Jesus
was a
was
Pisces,
like,
okay?
and it happened on December 20th of 2024. So it's so close to Christmas.
Jupiter
And
Saturn square. Dun, dun, dun,
literally, and
dun.
so when you look at that, you're like, oh, he is a threat to the state, just like Jesus was. Jesus was a threat to
Yes.
the occupation. And and Luigi, that didn't serve what they were trying to do.
Yes. Also, now that I'm riffing, like now we're like in our SAG riff mode, I feel like you think about the great conjunction Jupiter and Saturn together and how that
Mhm.
represents like the star, right? The ascendant, like they were looking for
Mhm.
Jupiter, Saturn like that. And I'm thinking about, yeah, this is the perp walk happening in the opening square. Like the
Mhm.
idea of logic and
Mhm.
faith. Like, what is your intuition telling you, and what are the facts telling you? And there is a need to integrate, like, and like, actually, hey, not, it's not all about facts. There is gray lines in between
Mhm.
that we need to get together. So,
Yeah.
yes.
And also the lawyer is
Mm.
married to Justin
Diddy's
Baldwin,
law. No,
right?
Diddy's lawyer.
Oh, Diddy's lawyer.
I
Okay.
think, I think, I'm pretty sure it's Diddy's lawyer. Yeah,
There's a
one of
connection.
them. There's a team. I know it was a very Jupiter Gemini moment. Like, what is this saying about the current system and
Mhm.
entertainment and like all this entrenched? I mean, yesterday too, obviously the Epstein files were
Mhm.
released, and I know a lot of people are disappointed with the logs, but I'm still of the camp that I think there is going to be more that does come out. It's just because the information is being released to very few sources, independent investigative journalists, rather than major media outlets. It's going to take some time for the information to like really seep through. But when you talked about Venus Pisces, when it retrogrades back, that's kind of when I see maybe a lot more of like the sludgery come out during Venus Pisces retrograde rather than the Aries. Aries, I feel like is more of like the fight that comes out
Mhm.
from it and the Me Too movement and all that good stuff, which I think will tie into healthcare also very intentionally. Um, but when Venus and Pisces rolls around, I do think you start to see more of the corruption and like the secrets
Mhm.
behind things come through,
Mhm.
which should make for a very, very interesting rest of spring.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially when it conjuncts Neptune again.
And
I
Saturn, oh my God,
Yes.
3 times.
Yes, I definitely consider Neptune to be the placement of the music and Hollywood, music
Hmm.
industry and Hollywood.
Yeah.
And anytime there has been a Neptune activation, something comes out. I think that last one was when Neptune went direct, something about Jay-Z came out, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will see more because, when Neptune enters Aries, I feel like it's like no rules.
No, no. It's I forget who said it best, Maurice Fernandez. I've been watching so much Neptune, he was talking about how with Neptune and Pisces, you were maybe more passive in your life. And then I like the idea that this is something we talk about a lot, right? The projection onto someone. And so I will say that Luigi potentially could be walking this fine line of the people projecting onto him as a savior rather than feeling empowered themselves to take action in their own lives
Yes.
and to enact, right? So I think there are still dangers here. I'm not an idolization type of
Mhm.
person. I don't believe in idols like that. I can believe in being inspired by someone. But again, I think it's the death of our relationship with passivity and saviorism. I think it's coming to an end. And I think that in turn actually can help empower us to be that Neptune and Aries force. Like, let me take that action. And sure, it's going to
Mhm.
be messy at first
Mhm.
because we've kind of given our agency away so many times in the past. But this is a period of reclaiming, of learning to even reclaim it. Like, the first step is to even understand you
Right.
can be the change you want to be.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That's such a good point. And I think that is why so many people are supporting Luigi, because we all wanted to do that at some point in our lives. But
Hmm.
if there's anybody that would get away with it, it is a white man. It is
Hmm.
a white, good looking, cis hetero man,
Yes,
you
yes.
know?
The gays will protect you, even though like the media, I'm chronically online as you are. If you are not chronically online, like, you're missing out on some incredible meme artwork, commemorative, like, I
It's all
just,
so good.
it's community building in its own
Mhm.
way. And it's, again, on a very, very important cause underlying it, right?
Mhm.
Healthcare for all.
Mhm.
So hopefully, you've tuned into this episode with your own ideas of stuff. We'd love to hear you in the comments. Please comment on the chart. Also, Laura, where can people find you? I'll include your information in the show notes, of course, but is there anything else
Yeah.
you want to talk about, offer? I know you've been doing amazing work raising money for um Palestine. So yeah, anything you want to share?
Um, well, you'll have everything in the show notes.
Hmm.
I also have a podcast called Awaken and Align. And I don't know, my relationship with Meta is like starting to deteriorate. So during this Venus and Mercury retrograde, I personally want to break up with it altogether, but it's like
Hmm.
I do have a following, so I want to use it in a way to bring bring awareness to causes like to Palestine and to
Hmm.
Congo and Sudan. So I think during the retrograde, I'm like reflecting on how I'm going to show up going forward.
Yeah. 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 I think that's really great. And I think that's also something other people should take heed of. Just because, energy's quote unquote starting to pick up doesn't mean you have to feel compelled to jump into the thing
Right.
immediately. I know we've been in waiting mode, but this is really kind of where the dust and the blocks are reshuffling,
Mhm.
resettling. So, take your time.
It's all about taking your power back.
Hmm.
And I feel like I'm giving so much and Meta is just taking all of my stuff. It's
Hmm.
literally like I feel like I'm showing up for the community, but
Hmm.
Meta is showing my content to like 2% of my following and restricting me when I say something like free Palestine. Like, come on, that's crazy. So I'm
Hmm.
like, how can I take my power back on some of these platforms
Hmm.
and, you know, show up in a way that is actually for community? So that's like the feeling behind it. It's very Venus,
Hmm.
Aries, and Mercury.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Making the necessary cuts when you've come to the
Exactly.
conclusion. Hmm.
Exactly.
Hmm. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Laura. It's always such a
Thank
pleasure to
you.
chat. I consider it lucky if I can get through a session with you without spontaneous laughing combustion. So, but thank you for tuning in, and we will be
Thank you.
back sooner than you think. Subscribe. Take care.
Bye.